My name's Kamalamayi, and I'm going to be giving a talk this morning on why or how seeing into emptiness makes us happy. And it's interesting that I was giving this talk. It's made me think a lot more about emptiness and happiness. And interestingly enough, I was having my breakfast in my little sunroom this morning, and it looks out on a lavender bush, and on the around the lavender bush were about 6 or 7 little white cabbage moths just floating around the lavender bush. And it made me think of the Heart Sutra, which I'll come back to later in the talk, and how it says, form is no other than emptiness, emptiness no other than form. So I could see from looking at this lavender bush and the moths this morning, yes, I could certainly see intellectually that both the lavender bush and the moths are empty of inherent existence, and I could also sense it a bit more, feel it a bit more as being the way things naturally are, this emptiness. But what was really beautiful about it was the appreciation of the form, the beautiful lavender bush and the dancing, fluttering cabbage moths all around. So this talk came into being, this seeing into emptiness makes us happy, partly because in my experience it's true, but partly because I've been rereading a book by a man called Rob Beer called Seeing That Frees. And it's an inspiring book about ways of seeing that reveal the emptiness of all things. So of necessity, I'm going to have to spend a fair bit of time talking about emptiness this morning. So we might ask, well, what is it? Well, it's not a thing, it's not a place, and it's not something that we have to attain. And Rob Beer describes it as a quality in everything that we can come to see. So this quality of emptiness is in absolutely everything, including ourselves. And when we see this quality of emptiness, things aren't so substantial, so real after all. So we can begin to see, this cup or this pen or this body, this feeling, this thought, this view, ourselves. None of those things have an inherent existence. It's not that the pen or the cup or the thoughts aren't here, they are. It's just that they're empty of anything substantial, ultimately. And it's so counterintuitive. We really believe we do have a self. And it all seems so real. But Buddhism says no. All things are empty of inherent existence. And we suffer because we don't want to see things that way. We cling on to ways that reinforce the sense of self. And when we reinforce this sense of self, it leads to suffering. And by the way, when I'm referring to suffering, I'm looking at a whole spectrum of things. It doesn't have to be, you've had a divorce or you've lost your job or you're sleeping in your car or anything like that. It could be that, of course, that is suffering. But it could also be that you've stubbed your toe or you've had a tiff with somebody. So there's a spectrum in this sense of suffering, and we could describe it as unsatisfactoriness. So Buddhism isn't denying that we exist. It's just saying, well, we don't exist in the way we think we do. We do have a form, but that form is empty. And as Thich Nhat Hanh, he's dead now, a Vietnamese Buddhist teacher and a peace activist, and he said, emptiness of self only means emptiness of self, not the non-being of self. Just as a balloon that's empty inside does not mean that the balloon doesn't exist. So we could see ourselves as beautiful balloons. We know we're here and we've got form, but we're empty inside, just like the balloon. But most of us don't want to see this at all. And we can feel a sense of disbelief for a start. Our gut feelings tell us we are real. Or we can have a sense of nihilism. We're falling into this void of meaningless nothingness. Or we can have fear that our self will be destroyed. But that's not what the Dharma says. So just to show we really are empty, we'll look first at the emptiness of our bodies. And I'm going to read to you an extract from a book by a man called Musung, who was a former Zen monk, and he became a co-founder of the Barre Center of Buddhist Studies in Massachusetts in the USA. And here he's actually quoting from another book by a man called George Leonard, The Silent Pulse. And this is what George Leonard says in this book, The Diamond Sutra. He says, if we could imagine that our hand is under a microscope, or our forearm, he says, the electron scanning microscope, with the power to magnify several thousand times, takes us down into a realm that has the look of the sea about it. In the kingdom of the corpuscles, there is transfiguration and there is samsara, the endless round of birth and death. Every passing second, some 2.5 million red blood cells are born. Every second, the same number die. The typical cell lives about 110 days, then becomes tired and decrepit. There are no lingering deaths here. As the magnification increases, the flesh begins to dissolve. Muscle fibre now takes on a fully crystalline aspect. We can see that it's made of long spiral molecules in an orderly array, and all of these molecules are swaying like wheat in the wind, connected with one another and held in place by invisible waves that pulse many trillions of times a second. What are the molecules made of? As we move closer, we see atoms, the tiny shadowy balls dancing around their fixed locations in the molecules, sometimes changing positions with their partners in perfect rhythms. And now we focus on one of those atoms. Its interior is lightly veiled by a cloud of electrons. We come closer, increasing the magnification. The shell dissolves and we look inside to find nothing. Somewhere within that emptiness, we know is a nucleus. We scan that space, and there it is, a tiny dot. At last, we have discovered something hard and solid, a reference point. But no, as we move closer to the nucleus, it too begins to dissolve. It too is nothing more than an oscillating field, waves of rhythm. Inside the nucleus are other organized fields, protons, neutrons, even smaller particles. Each of these, upon our approach, also dissolve into pure rhythm. Of what is our body made? It is made of emptiness and rhythm. At the heart of the body, at the heart of the world, there is no solidity. Once again, there is only the dance. So, our bodies are empty. Another example of emptiness from the Heart Sutra, famous teaching about the fundamental emptiness of everything. And the Heart Sutra says, form is no other than emptiness, emptiness no other than form. Form is only emptiness, emptiness only form. Feeling, thought, and choice, consciousness itself, are the same as this. So form, which is our bodies, our feelings, our thoughts, our choices, they are here, but they're empty. I mean, I love the way this sutra doesn't deny the form of things. It seems to be saying, yes, we're empty, that's true, but never forget the form of things. And it seems like emptiness and form, form and emptiness go together like peas in a pod. So, for example, you've got a friend who's in hospital with a couple of broken legs and is not feeling so great. Well, you're not going to say to that friend, goodness me, get a grip, mate. You're not going to say, you're totally empty, so you don't have to worry about anything. You won't approach things like that, will you? You know, you'll be in the world of form with that person. You'll be kind and helpful and empathetic. And just a last example of emptiness. You would have noticed the beautiful jacaranda trees around at the moment. And we could ask ourselves, well, what's that jacaranda tree made of? Well, it's trunk and roots and branches and stems and leaves and flowers. And it has all kinds of elements. It's got oxygen and hydrogen and nitrogen and potassium. Well, you can't see those, can you? And there's photosynthesis going on all the time where the tree converts the sun's energy into chemical energy in the carbon of the tree, the woody part of the tree. And then there's the flowers. They're just gorgeous. So you've got perhaps a lizard running around among the flowers, and we know that lizard is empty, but it's here. And we can see the birds on the jacaranda tree, likewise empty, but here. And the flowers are just so gorgeous, and they form a carpet. So you could say, well, I can look at this and say, yes, those flowers are empty, but I can still appreciate the form because they're so beautiful. Likewise, with people, you know, we could appreciate the qualities of our good friend, for example, perhaps how they make you laugh, and laughter is surely empty. You could look at their quirks, you know, their steadfastness, even their silliness or their little tantrums. And the beauty of that person in their entirety. They're just there before you, and you, as a student of the Dharma, you could just have in the back of your mind that there's this mysterious quality in the whole encounter with your friend. It's something indescribable in a way and empty, but at the same time, here they are before you, this total person, and you're just appreciating them there before you in the world of form. So that's a little bit about emptiness. We might ask, well, how does seeing into emptiness, how could that make us happy? Well, I think it's when the self temporarily isn't there or it's abated, we can get little insights into emptiness. And when there's less self, there's less clinging. And it's clinging that leads to suffering. So if we don't have any clinging, there's no suffering temporarily, and therefore we're happier. So the Buddha spoke of alleviating suffering many, many times. And probably the best known teaching he gave was the very first teaching after his enlightenment, and that was the Four Noble Truths, that yes, there's suffering, and secondly, suffering is caused by clinging. And there's a way to end suffering, that's the third one. And the fourth one is that way to end suffering is the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path. So, and Rob Berbia's definition of insight, and I think this is fabulous, is any realization, understanding, or way of seeing that brings to any degree a dissolution or decrease in suffering. So I'll just read this again. Any realization, understanding, or way of seeing that brings to any degree a dissolution or decrease in suffering. So insight brings less suffering. Our little insights bring less suffering, and therefore we can be happier. And I found this definition of insight to be so open, so expansive and comprehensive. And it suggests that insight into the nature of emptiness can be both worldly or transcendental, and it can be large or small. But Rob Berbea also points out that an insight moment probably won't be enough on its own to overcome our deep delusion that things inherently exist. So we do have to find ways of seeing that lessen this delusion. So how might we do this? Well, I'm going to suggest some of my own experiences and some more general experiences. So first of all, you could just try to see things or experience things with a bare attention. For example, my breakfast usually consists of fruit and nuts and yogurt. And I really try when I'm having my breakfast to do nothing else but have my breakfast. And so I'm aware of the colours, I'm aware of the sound of the crunch, I'm aware of the touch, which is the feel, what it feels like in my mouth. And when I'm just with those sensations and dropping any storylines, then I'm in a kind of bare attention, and I haven't got room for intrusive thoughts. So therefore, there's less dukkha, there's less suffering in that moment, and therefore there's more contentment. So we could also do this in the shower, when we're washing up, when we're gardening, when we're walking. There's multiple opportunities to just be with bare attention. And when you're with bare attention, temporarily, dukkha is abated. And I'm also thinking of when we're sad, for example. If you look at it more closely, you might find that sadness isn't uninterrupted. So we feel sad, moments of sadness, and then that's gone. Then maybe we feel a little bit of compassion for ourselves, and then sadness again. So you can see, if you look that way, that things aren't quite as solid or heavy as they seem to be. Or you could ask yourself, is my behavior now leading to more suffering or less suffering? And this could give you little insights into the way you lead your life, and you could choose to change because, as Rob Berbea said, you have these little insights and they're probably not enough to make you change. So you have to act. And lastly, a couple of my own personal experiences. And the first one, and I know this was a real insight, and it's about how I practice metta. So for a long time, and I think this was the way we were taught then, you were supposed to generate this metta inside you, making it bigger and bigger and stronger until finally it had to burst out. And then you'd be sending metta to yourself and all the other people in the stages of the metta bhavana. Well, I did that and did that and did that. And yes, I could generate metta. But one day I was sitting down, meditating, and I must have been in a pretty calm and grounded state. And suddenly, metta came to me. All I was doing was being receptive. And there it was. All I had to do was open out, and here was this metta. It's out there in the universe. So the more we can just let go, release, ground ourselves, be open and responsive and receptive, the more metta will naturally come to us. And that's the way I've approached metta ever since. I know that that was a real insight because it did change the way I practiced on the cushion, and it also changed the way I practiced in my life. So that insight has made me happier over the years. Also, when I've been in deep meditation, sometimes things become very expansive, very flowing, unbounded, luminous. I'm sure many of you have experienced this state. And when that happens, temporarily, it seems as though there's no self. There's just a luminous awareness. And it's a most beautiful feeling. So that, I think, is a connection with the empty nature of things. And then, of course, it changes and you go back to your everyday life. But you can remember it. And that just sort of happens as well. I don't ever try to force that to happen, but sometimes it does. So I'm just going to leave you now with a beautiful quote from the Diamond Sutra. So you should view all of the fleeting worlds, a star at dawn, a bubble in the stream, a flash of lightning in a summer cloud, a flickering lamp, a phantom and a dream. So thank you. That concludes my talk this morning.